This is the business culture of agriculture. My name is Andy Junkin, and with me tonight is Joel Silverman of Silverman Law, and he's out of law office out of Bozeman, Montana, also Helena, Montana, and he specializes in tax and estate planning. Very niche specialty. Does a lot of work with ranchers in the Montana region. And welcome to the show here tonight, Joel.
Thank you, Andy. I'm looking forward to this.
Well, I appreciate you really being on. And, you know, I think we just want to start off by asking, what are the three biggest mistakes that you see a lot of farmers make when it comes to estate planning? What are the biggest tax mistakes that a lot of farmers have?
Well, from a tax perspective, the three biggest mistakes we see are, number one, when you're buying additional property, real estate, that we're not seeing the realtors work with the rancher on putting together a purchase price allocation. And what I mean by purchase price allocation is I had a client recently, Andy, that rancher buying 300 acres. And in the buy-sell, it didn't mention anything about allocating the purchase price to anything other than the raw land. Well, as we know, raw land is non-deductible. You don't get to depreciate land. Series of questions, found out he had a bunch of fence there. He had irrigation equipment and head gates. They had an old homestead house there. Well, we were able to allocate the purchase price on that to around between the raw land, the building, the irrigation equipment, and the fence, and we literally saved our client $30,000 in taxes by taking advantage of that one issue. The other thing we tend to see is people not paying, farmers and ranchers, not paying attention to the estate tax. And the estate tax is now at $5.5 million per person. And they're so afraid of the estate tax that they don't do proper planning. And instead, they gift away the farm to their children. And they end, in exchange for the estate tax, they now create a big income tax issue. Whereas if they would go sit down with their team of advisors, being their attorney, their CPA, their financial advisor, and their insurance person, they could set up a great game plan that would avoid the estate tax and save their family income taxes for generations. And then probably the third biggest mistake I see is when I see real estate trapped inside an S corporation. What happens there is, now all of a sudden, mom and dad want to carve off a little chunk of the ranch, and so their son or daughter can go build a house on it. Well, if real estate is owned inside an S corporation, when you pull that real estate out, the IRS says you have to treat it as if you sold that real estate to a third party, and you have to pay tax on the difference between the fair market value of that real estate and your basis, which oftentimes is very, very low. So you have a pretty big tax gain. And they don't even know that they've done it until their CPA comes around and says, hey, what'd you do here? And they tell the CPA, and by then it's too late.
And what is the average age of the farmers that you're working with and ranchers? What's the average age of the successor, the next generation? How many years have they, on average, been working on the farm before they even start to see any equity in the operation?
Well, unfortunately, Andy, we see a lot of times where mom and dad are in their mid to late 60s. So the kids are in their mid 30s that are working on the ranch. And that's really pretty late in the game to try and start putting together a good, effective game plan. It's not too late, but unfortunately it is late. And so we end up missing out on a lot of tools that we could have otherwise at our disposal to start bringing the kids in as equity owners to slowly transition the ownership from mom and dad down to the next generation and take advantage of some great tax benefits that are out there.
And quite often, are you like I get called in as a mediator to sort things out when the mom or dad are in their late 70s and early 80s, and the sons and daughters are, you know, late mid 40s even and early 50s. Do you see that very often? And what kind of problems do you see beyond the family relationships, just from a tax perspective, do you often see as a result of just putting things off?
Yeah, Andy, we're seeing that an awful lot these days. And unfortunately, it's because, it seems that there's a perception that if I don't deal with my estate planning and I don't get a plan in place, I'll live forever.
Yeah.
Instead of thinking of it as, right, instead of thinking of it like maybe like crop insurance, that if you plan ahead, you solve problems. But if you stick your head in the sand like the ostrich, all of a sudden you don't have crop insurance and you have a bad year, right? Or you lose a bunch of cattle because you have a really horrendous winter and you didn't have insurance in place. That's in reality what I view what we do as, is we create that insurance system so that mom and dad can work into the period where they want to retire, and they've got the next generation coming up to take over the ranch and allow mom and dad to live the lifestyle they'd like or desired after having worked so hard for their whole life.
And I always, I always say that for a lot of families, to cancel the fire insurance on the barns and the house until you get your succession strategy is one way to get the process sped up, because the probability of a fire insurance and the need for fire insurance is pretty low compared to having a succession strategy. It's just crazy. But the key question I have is there a way for a lot of parents, they perceive that, oh, I'm not ready yet to retire. Is there a way for a family to start doing succession planning and have, instead of it being like a traditional concept of passing over the baton or passing over the torch, is there a way for 3-4 generations to have joint ownership into a family business so that mom and dad can farm until the day they die and still have the majority of shares in the corporation, but at least the sons and daughters know that they're earning equity in the business instead of waiting to see what's going on in the will?
Absolutely. There's a lot of ways to skin that cat, and everybody's a little different and a little unique in that aspect. Every family is. So we get in and we work with that team, as I described earlier, right? We get in with the CPA, we get in with the financial advisor, their insurance person, and we craft a plan for them, because every family ranch and farm is different, so that they can continue to work if that's their goal, is work until the day they die and yet still maintain control of the business. Give the kids some equity interest, like you said, which gives them the added incentive to work harder because they know they're going to be taken care of, while also ensuring that mom and dad have fully disclosed their succession plan to the kids to alleviate or hopefully eliminate any family squabbles that may happen when mom and dad pass away.
And give us an example of a family squabble that you've seen happen because there wasn't full disclosure.
Absolutely. So recently we were trying to help two sons who had been working on the family ranch for the better part of 40 years. And, since they were born, they've been working there. And mom and dad had paid them basically below minimum wage their entire life. And they had more or less been promised that, when we're going to pass away, we're leaving it all to you, right? Well, they kept working, and then they finally said, well, wait a second, we have no guarantee, mom and dad, that that's what you're going to do. Help us out. We want to buy into the ranch. Well, dad stubbornly said, no, I'm not going to allow you to do that, even though dad wasn't working anymore. It was the two kids were working and leasing the ranch. And dad raised the rent or the lease, and the kids finally said, you know what, dad, we're done, because you're not going to give us any options here for long-term protection for our families. And so literally the two sons are done after this season.
And I think that happens way too often. And what I see is families that had a lot of trust. These aren't white trash families I see. Like, these are upstanding, go to church every Sunday, well-respected families in the community, where the respect is a key part of their family and trust is a key part of their family's culture. And then when they start to ask, sons or daughters start to ask in their 40s, it's a reflection of the parents saying, don't you trust me? And then things just get out of control, and respect is lost. And then in that situation, the father wanted full valuation for the farm, just as a way to evaluate his worth, because his ego had been chipped away, and the whole discussions leading up to that argument, I guess you'd say. And so it's really sad.
Well, yeah, it really is, Andy. And one thing I always like to tell clients, whether it's a farm and ranch family or even any other business family, what do you want? What do you value more? Your dollars in that business, or the fact that that family business will continue for generations? And once they change their mindset about that, it's not about the dollars as much anymore, that it's about keeping the family business going, that it's about that ranch and those cows and the crops that they care so much about, that land that they grew up on will continue in the family. All of a sudden they change their mindset about succession planning, and they want to go get it done because they want to make sure that the family's still got a place to farm and ranch.
Yeah, and I had a guy in the Midwest, and he had a farm. He had worked his butt off. He had farmed. He also had a shop in town, and he had I think it was 4-bay shop where he had a going concern for business in the automotive industry. And he got cancer, and his son kept that business going. And he came back, and he said, okay, basically the son had said, let's push him for succession planning. And so he says, yeah, sure, we'll do that. And the father, he wanted full value for that business. And they went through the inventory, like he had a filter for, a Mustang, 1967 Mustang. He had basically a warehouse full of crap. And his son was like, there's no way I can afford to buy this business. I mean, the building itself is maybe worth $100,000. And, I had kept it going as a business. And here he wants $400,000 for it. There's no way I'll ever be able to afford it. And the whole issue was that it was the way that father had valued being able to start a business from nothing to being able to grow it to something. And, as a result, he had a shop in town that sat and empty, and it was, falling apart because he and his son-in-law could not come to an arrangement. Well, I mean, we had the same issue when it came to doing farm succession, and we had to ask him, what do you want on your? Do you want a headstone that's really the nicest in town? You can have a big angel on it. You can spend $30,000 on your headstone, or do you want to have a business going 30 years down the road? That's a family farm that goes on. That's your great grandchildren farm. And I think we often miss a point, but I think a lot of that issue chips away to how the family deals with one another, when it comes to estate planning. And quite often, family patriarchs, their egos get bruised, and that they lose sight of the long-term game. And so I think that's so key. I'm sorry to go off on a tangent about that, but we're on the same page. So so you talked about how important it is to get a deal in place. Let's talk about side deals. And if you're a son and daughter working your way into the business, is there a way for the family to start giving equity in proportion to wages without being taxed on it?
Yeah, it's that term side deals, right? I always like to call it communication. The basics of communication are what will save the family farm and get the kids involved. So if mom and dad say, geez, son or daughter, here is our plan. You work on the farm for the next 5 years, and we're going to get you equity. If you do that, your kids now have a goal to shoot for. Don't just hand it to them. Give them a goal. Give them something that they can be proud of and work towards, so that they actually honor what you're giving them because they had to go get it. They didn't just get it handed over to them, right? Mom and dad didn't just get it given to them. They had to go earn it. So make your kids go do it too. But once you get them in the business, you've got to treat it like a business. You've got to get those operating agreements or bylaws in place. You need those stock restriction agreements. You need to treat them like you would a third-party partner.
And I think that's so key. I mean, there's so many families where mom and dad dangle the carrot in front of the kids for so long that the amount of trust and respect that happens between family members just dissipates. And parents get offended by kids starting at mid-30s insist that there's some succession planning happening, and there's a feeling that mom and dad want the kids off. The kids want to take over the farm and get mom and dad to leave, and part of that reason is because they've been having this carrot dangled in front of them for so long that it causes family relationships to go off course. So you're saying 5 years. What a way I like to do it is to say, okay, if you work 10,000 hours, then we'll start to gift you X amount of shares, and have that as a side deal that's offered to all the family members, not just the son and daughter that are interested in the farm, but that girl that went to or the son that's a gay hairdresser. If he wants to come work 5,000 hours or 10,000 hours on the farm, he gets the opportunity to earn equity the same as the brother that's interested in the farm. And would you not say that that's the way, by doing it based on hours put into the operation as opposed to years, the son or daughter might work their butt off even more, be better quality successor?
Absolutely. You kind of have to judge what's going to be the best carrot for your kids, right? And it could be hours, it could be productivity, right? Are they going to be able to raise, enough? Are they going to be able to increase the crop yields or increase the herd size enough that that's really what is going to be their equity? And oftentimes that's what I see parents shooting for now, is they're sending their kids to college and saying, go get educated and come back and help us be better business people.
Yeah, and I do with a farm in Ontario. We do based on hours put in. We do based on they get gifted equity based on how much they improve profitability, because this farm is in a precarious financial situation, and also just ability to work with other people. I mean, the one son, he's gone from being basically somebody you do not want to work with, and in 6 months, it's been only 3 months. We've changed his whole behavior because he's been given performance scores. If you get out of bed in the morning, if you don't get out of bed in the morning, you don't get your bonus for the month. So those three things combined is I see a way to go. And I think if you can set that up for your 20 or 22-year-old son or daughter, and set the availability to all the family members off the bat, it's a side deal. So it can't ever, it's very important to say that cannot be shown to the IRS. And you want to explain why a deal like that should not be shown to the IRS, to the other family members watching?
You bet. So if you put that side deal into a contract and the IRS came and audited and they saw that contract, what the IRS does is they turn around and say, okay, you is the child that is signing on to that contract. When you get your ownership interest, we're going to treat that as income to you because it was an exchange for services. And those services have value. So they value the stock based on the amount of services provided, and then the kid has to pay income taxes on it. And that can be a pretty steep.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's important to gift. So stock, let's talk about stock restriction. Let's talk about prenuptial agreements and stock restriction agreements. I'm getting married at the end of the month on April 29th here. And so I got to watch what I say here, I guess you'd say. But the biggest thing is you talk about stock restriction agreements and if you had a son or daughter and you were concerned about divorce as a probability of within your family, say your kids are 20, 22 years old, they're not married yet. But someday you'll have 2 or 3 kids come home and join the family business, and the probability somebody's going to get divorced. How would you prevent that from being an issue in the long term?
You bet, Andy. You know, the first thing I'd say is I sure hope your fiance's put a prenup in front of you, because I don't know how trustworthy you really are.
Absolutely. She is.
But you know, it's a hard deal because, right, prenups are viewed so negatively, and they can scare off the potential spouse for your child, and it creates a lot of animosity. So oftentimes, rather than doing a prenup, we do a stock restriction agreement. The stock restriction agreement is between shareholders of the company, so that the soon-to-be spouse never knows about the stock restriction agreement. And so the stock restriction agreement says in time of death or divorce or leaving the company, there's a way to value that stock and for the company to buy that stock back in an organized method for valuing the stock and buying it back. And if it's in the case of divorce or death or leaving the company, you structure those stock restriction agreements in such a way that it protects the company so it can keep going forward without the divorce, death, or leaving the business sinking the company financially.
Yeah, and I think that's the key thing. And also, I see prenuptial agreements. I mean, they're quite often given to the son or daughter-in-law, you know, the day before a wedding or a couple weeks before the wedding occurs, and nothing says welcome to the family like a prenuptial agreement. If you're going to gift, if you're going to insist on a prenuptial agreement being signed, I would suggest that, you know, that happens before the son or daughter-in-law to be is ever invited for a Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas. You know, that's, I mean, well in advance is what I always lecture. Yeah, so I don't know if you can give an example of a bad prenuptial agreement or two, or maybe we won't touch that with the 10-foot pole. What's a shareholders agreement? What are key things you think a farm family should have in a shareholders agreement to prevent problems?
Yeah, you know, the biggest thing that you've really got to look for in that shareholders agreement, and you'll see them called bylaws, you'll see them called stock restriction agreements, you'll see them called operating agreements if it's an LLC or a partnership or family limited partnership. But some of the biggest things you've really got to watch for is, how does someone come on as an owner, right? So if you and I are partners in a company, we're shareholders in a corporation, and you want to bring your brother in, what rights do I have to prevent that from happening? Or can you just force it down my throat based on how much percentage you own? We also want to see what are the percentage ownership requirements for changing that agreement. So if somebody wants to amend it and they don't have enough voting power, they may not get to amend the agreement. And it could end up hurting them down the road. It could end up hurting the business because the wrong person might have all the voting power that's needed to make decisions unilaterally for the business. So you really want to look at those voting requirements. The other thing that's really, really important in those is, how does someone get out of the company? So if mom or dad want to be bought out of the company, what does the company require? Or let's say one of the kids is in the company and the kid says, you know what? I don't want to be a part of the business anymore, mom and dad, buy me out. Can that kid basically hold the rest of the family hostage because of their rights as a shareholder?
And I think that on another topic, I understand that you do a lot with your clients with farm financials, as far as helping them understand how much the family should be drawing from the business. With a lot of, say, corn producers in the Midwest, obviously price of corn's dropped from $7 and now it's in the $4 range. Lifestyles have not adjusted accordingly, and you know, farm families that were very frugal back in the 80s have still they've maintained a lifestyle, and you know, over the last 10 years, they've adjusted their lifestyle to be more flamboyant, I guess you'd say. And you know, now that we're back into hard times, a lot of farm families are having a hard time understanding how much they should be drawing from the business. given that the business is not as profitable as it was 5 years ago. What do you suggest a farm family does as far as personal finances and business finances?
You bet. So we view what we do as a holistic approach, if you will, kind of the hippies of the practice of law. We want to look at somebody's business in its entirety, because the last thing we want our clients to end up is that 90% of small businesses in America that go belly up 5 years in the first 5 years. We want our clients to be long-term clients. So we take a lot of pride in our clients' finances. So we work with our clients to make sure that their personal finances can match the business, because that's the single biggest mistake we see, is exactly what you described. All of a sudden, commodity prices drop, right? We're not seeing the same cattle prices we saw 3 years ago when we had the big freeze out in the Dakotas and we lost so many cattle across the country. Well, now all of a sudden cattle prices are dropping again and families haven't eased up on their spending. But it's because their personal finances are outstripping the finances of the business. So we like to get in there and understand the finances, the tax returns, the P&L statements. We want to see the balance sheets so we can advise our clients how much they can take out of that company at any given time based on percentages, not based on the dollars. And that's the single biggest mistake we see, is your gross revenues can decrease, but if you base what comes out of the business based on percentages, then you're always safe, because you're looking at whatever percentage of gross revenues are what's available to the owners. Rather than saying, well, last year we had $150,000 we could take out of the business, why can't we do it this year? Well, because your gross revenues decreased, and maybe you should only be taking 1% of gross out of the company, and instead your gross revenues decreased, but you're actually taking a larger percentage of your gross out because you haven't eased up on your personal spending.
And when you got go on to a different topic here, when you've got you're trying to groom a son or daughter, and they like farming, they're passionate about farming, but they just don't have what it takes to be a good manager. Have you structured a few deals where you've had a non-family member involved in the operation? And what kind of approach do you generally take with that kind of situation?
Well, there's basically two approaches to take on that, in my mind, when you're bringing in a non-family member to run the family ranch. Number one, you've got to make sure that the kids that are working the ranch understand why you're bringing this person in. And you've got to have those honest conversations. Number two, you want to incentivize that manager to do the most bang-up job possible and to educate your kids, because what happens if mom and dad pass away and the manager's gone? So when we're trying to incentivize a manager, we're either bringing them in an ownership percentage, or we're bringing them in as a profit-sharing percentage. And that way they've got the incentive to make that family ranch or farm better.
And just the final point here for the evening here is, if you have a son or daughter, you're in your 40s or early 50s, and you still haven't got a succession deal done or even started, how do you help mom and dad get over that mental hurdle? What is it that you have said to clients in the past that really made things effective?
You know, a lot of times families, parents look at this succession planning and estate planning as, well, geez, if I do that, then I'm probably going to die right after I do that. Well, the reality is it's like insurance. Would you ever not have fire insurance on your home or the barns, or not have equipment insurance or crop insurance maybe, right? All they're doing is setting their kids up for failure if they don't put a succession plan in place. In the end, the farm or ranch is a business, and they need to run it like a business, and that includes succession planning, having the right people and the right plan in place to take over when you decide to step aside.
So, Joel, how do people get a hold of you? This has been Joel Silverman of Silverman Law Office in Helena and Bozeman, Montana. What's your phone number, Joel? And say it twice so people can hear it. Correct.
You bet. So our main line is 406-449-4829. And you can reach anybody on our team, myself included, at that number. Our website's mttaxlaw.com. You know, we help ranchers all around the country because it's not, again, like I said, it's not just legal issues we're helping with. We're helping with tax issues. We're helping with succession planning. And it's all about ensuring people's success.
Well, thanks very much for being on the show. This is the Business Culture of Agriculture. We have it every weeknight on at 8 o'clock Central Standard Time. Joel Silverman from Silverman Law Office in Bozeman, Montana. Thanks very much for being on the show tonight. You take care and God bless.
Thank you, Andy. Appreciate it.
Take care.